That morning, the marble floors of the Harrington estate were still carrying last night's shine, a glassy gleam left by hands that never made the guest list. Amina Davis, in a pressed uniform and quiet shoes, followed the gleam with a cotton mop and the measured patience of someone who had learned not to rush her presence through rooms that were not built for her. The mansion woke in fragments, espresso hissing in the chef's kitchen, radios crackling on the belts of security, the house manager's clipped syllables drifting up the central well of the staircase, and in each fragment a voice or a glance slid past Amina, as if she were air. She accepted the invisibility the way you accept the chill that meets you at a bus stop on a winter morning. You brace, you breathe, you endure, and you move. 2 weeks earlier, she had been hired with the vague promise of extra hands, the kind of promise that always meant long hours and little thanks. She did not mind the hours. She minded the waste of time, of food, of kindness. But she had made a vow when she walked through the iron gates. Whatever she couldn't change, she would not let change her. She had made a second vow long before that, standing on linoleum beside a hospital bed, watching numbers dip and rise on a screen while her mother waited for relief that came too late and cost too much. The second vow was simple: pay every dollar of debt that had taken shape around those months of sickness. Lift the stone from her family's name. Do it without bitterness that would harden and stay. Stay steady, she wrote in a blue notebook on the bus the day she was hired. Know who you are. They don't. Not yet. The east wing of the estate was a hallway of polished portraits, faces carrying the kind of confidence that photographs give to bloodlines and balances. Halfway down the hall, a pair of muddy shoe prints interrupted the polish. Amina had just wiped the last trace of last night's party from those steps when Tyler, a young security guard with an oversized badge and a voice that bent into swagger whenever anyone watched, jogged past without looking down. His toe dragged a damp crescent through the center of her clean work. He did not stop. He did not see. She paused, pressed lips into something like a smile, and lifted the bucket to begin again. In the kitchen, Chef Denise reigned with unbothered authority, a woman whose braid was as tight as her schedule. "Stick to the basics, sweetheart," she said without turning, as if Amina had been thinking of leaping for the copper pans. "Looks matter around here." Amina folded towels. She labeled bins. She swept flour the way a nurse had once swept a curtain aside to shield her mother from the light. Later, she carried supplies to the upstairs laundry and smoothed linens on a guest bed so precisely that a quarter would have bounced, though no one would ever test it. She was fit for the quiet tasks because her quiet had practice. The quiet of being the first to leave class to catch 2 buses to the clinic. The quiet of studying after a double shift. The quiet of learning chest compressions from a teacher whose voice shook but whose hands did not. She had 2 years of nursing school stamped into her bones, and none of it stamped onto her resume. When the bills grew teeth, she had laid school gently on a high shelf and told herself it would be there when she could reach again. In the hallway outside the guest suite, she heard Belle Harrington before she saw her. Belle's voice was pitched like a blade that had been polished more for beauty than for work, cool, gleaming, sharp, without needing to prove it. "Dad gets in tonight," she declared to no one and to everyone, skimming a manicured finger over the edge of a console table. "I want this wing at perfection, not near perfection. And get some air in here. It smells average." And she said the last word with the wonder a child might use for meteor or octopus, a new creature whose habits she would never study. Amina kept working. Dignity for her was not an extra garment you slipped on when an audience arrived. It was skin. It traveled with you into rooms where people mispronounced your name, and into rooms where they did not bother to try. The staff break room sat low in the house, a narrow, warm bunker between the laundry and the supply closet. It was a room of sagging springs and chipped table corners, a place where laughter usually traveled quickly and gossip traveled quicker. When Amina pushed through the door for her water bottle, the laughter lifted like smoke and vanished. 3 conversations paused in mid-air and stayed there, suspended and pointed. She nodded. "Morning." Her voice, soft but certain, circled the room and returned to her. No reply. She pulled her bottle from the shelf and turned. A whisper broke the hush. "She gives me the creeps," someone said, Marcy, likely the third-floor housekeeper, with a nervous laugh. "Always listening. Never saying anything. Maybe she's spying for the boss," another added. "Or one of those churches where they don't talk, just stare. Or maybe she just can't stand your breath," a braver voice cracked, and giggles exploded like birds startled from a fence. Amina did not flinch. She had outlived words sharper than these. She walked out into the garden and breathed the kind of air that did not ask who you were before admitting you to its clean. The roses in clay pots pressed their scent into the damp around her. She sat on a step and took out the blue notebook. "Stay steady," she wrote. "You know who you are." They don't. Not yet. Upstairs. A window slid open and Belle leaned out, shading her eyes as if the morning sun were an insult directed at her personally. She watched the maid with the notebook, decided that stillness was the most suspicious movement, and said under her breath, "Weird." The name Blake Harrington entered rooms before he did. It traveled down corridors in the voices of staff who had never met him, and in the posture of those who had. A quiet shoulder stiffness, a way of looking to confirm that nothing and no one had been changed without permission. He had made his salt and steel fortune a continent away from Savannah, and returned not to live inside the town, but to hover over it like weather. People said he was chilly. People said he was ill. People said he'd had 2 close calls, and now moved like a man who understood how quickly a step can be the last. Few people said they had spoken to him last week or last month, because few had. The East Wing belonged to him like a vow belongs to the person who swore it. It was entered by invitation or emergency only. The evening he arrived, lights bloomed along the drive in a disciplined line, and black cars drifted up the gravel as if they had practiced. Amina, polishing the iron scrollwork of the grand staircase with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon, heard the low music of expensive engines and stopped. Cloth between finger and thumb, just long enough to see a man step from the back seat of the lead car. His hair was gray in the way of storms that you watch from behind a window. His suit fit like quiet. He carried the weight that money cannot set down. Belle glided toward him and offered a cheek that welcomed exactly 1 kiss and no examination. "Glad you're feeling better, Daddy," she sang. "Big dinner tomorrow. Lots of important people. You'll be up for it." Blake nodded. He looked past her, as if making sure the house was still where he left it. His gaze touched Amina and, for a fraction of a beat, did not move. She lowered her eyes, not with shame but with the old habit of stepping out of the way of a moving thing. When she looked up, he had already gone, a nurse at his shoulder and an assistant trailing with a notebook. The morning of the dinner, the house organized itself into a swift, wordless map of tasks. Chef Denise's orders ricocheted between burners. Security checked lists. The florist made small forests in vases taller than a child. Amina was assigned to set up a side station in the ballroom. Reserve napkins, extra flatware, fresh towels, quiet vigilance. She worked with the deliberate hands of someone who understands that order is both a courtesy and a kind of love. "Why is she even here?" Marcy murmured to another housekeeper within the precise earshot of hurting. "This isn't cleaning duty." "Maybe she thinks she'll get promoted if she keeps looking all calm like that," the other whispered, laughing through her nose. Amina kneestead the last silver soup spoons in a linen-lined tray. She did not prize calm for what it could buy her. She prized it for what it could save. Rick, a server whose youth found its confidence in other people's discomfort, slid past at speed with a tray of red wine glasses. The tray tilted just enough to baptize Amina's sleeve in a thin runnel of Cabernet. He did not stop. "Oops," he said, pleasure and apology nowhere near each other in his voice. "Might want to stick to the back hallways next time. This is kind of an elite thing." She took a clean cloth, blotted the red that seeped like a small, slow bruise, and turned to look at him. "I'll return to the back when I'm done doing what was asked of me," she said, just loud enough that the sentence stayed in the air. Then she went back to aligning napkin rings. Across the room, in the shadowed edge of a library doorway, Blake Harrington sat in a leather chair and watched the way she steadied herself and the air around her. Night came dressed in black cars and polished shoes. The elite of Savannah arrived the way rain arrives after a long drought, with relief and noise. The ballroom cleared its throat and became a mirror for chandeliers. The centerpieces drew light up and returned it. Belle floated in a gown that understood its purpose. Blake, having declined the place at the center of his own table, asked for a quiet room and settled in the library among books that had grown familiar with the sound of his breathing. Late into the evening, Amina carried a bundle of fresh towels and napkins to the library. Nothing unusual, a last-minute request from an assistant who knew that when you ask the right person for a thing, it simply appears. She knocked, turned the knob at the soft come, and entered. "Mr. Harrington, I brought the linens," she said, placing the folded cloths on a side table and turning toward the door. The water glass on the desk lay on its side, a small pool spreading into the Persian rug. In the wingback chair, Blake's head had fallen against the leather. His eyelids fluttered in the language of a failing body. His right hand clawed at the air for stability that was not there. His lips carried a gray that should only belong to stone. Amina crossed the room, the bundle of towels falling behind her unnoticed. 2 fingers to his neck, a pulse, small and panicked. She loosened his tie, slid him to the rug with a nurse's caution, rolled him gently to clear his airway. The music from the ballroom thickened the walls. The house's attention was somewhere else. "Mr. Harrington?" she said, as if calling his name back from a distance. No response. You do not forget the rhythm your hands learned when a plastic chest in a classroom clicked beneath them, when a teacher shouted numbers, when you imagined a face you loved set upon that plastic and promised yourself you would never hesitate. Amina interlaced her fingers and pressed. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, press, breathe, press, breathe. "Stay with me," she said, voice low and steady, counting aloud not for him, but to keep her own fear from crowding her hands. It is a strange intimacy, this work of insisting that a heart keep its promise. She anchored her weight over his sternum and pushed life down and into. Her breaths were measured. Her gaze ran back and forth between the rise of his chest and the clock's second hand. Minutes were large animals that would not be moved by shouting. She calmed them with numbers. He gasped. A cough stuttered from his throat, the way fire stutters out of damp kindling. His eyelids opened, shuddered, opened again. "You're here," she said. Not because he needed the information, but because the room needed to be told the truth. Breathe with me. In. Out. Stay. She kept a palm against his shoulder and counted while color slowly waded back into his skin, hesitant but obedient. When the paramedics finally arrived, summoned after someone realized the host had not been holding court in any of his usual rooms, they found him stabilized and conscious, the difference between a late ambulance and a widow standing on the rug. Amina withdrew to the edge of the room and held her breath while professionals took over. She did not explain. There would be time for the explanation they would accept. She had done what needed doing, the way a bridge holds because you cross it. She stepped into the hallway, smoothed her sleeves, and returned to the work that groaned in every corner of the house. She carried a bucket through the kitchen where Chef Denise stood very still for the first time in Amina's memory, hands on the metal counter like anchor points. For the rest of the evening, the house wrapped itself around the emergency and pretended the wrap was poise. Guests departed in careful lines. Belle posed for a final photograph and refused to let her voice tremble until the last car door closed. What happened became a rumor before it became a report. He collapsed. He didn't. The nurse handled it. The doctor came. Nobody came. He's fine. He's not. A house meeting was called the next day, unusual enough to make even the bold whisper. Staff gathered under the high ceiling of the main hall, standing in clusters that admitted no new members. The double doors opened and Blake walked in, a step slow, a blanket across his shoulders that no one mentioned. He stood without the microphone that events required and looked at the people who made his house work as if they were not furniture. "Someone in this house saved my life last night," he said. The sentence emptied the room of all other noise. "I collapsed in the library. I was found stabilized. It was not my nurse or my doctor who did that. I want to know who it was. Silence does not always mean the same thing. The silence that followed was fear, calculation, surprise, embarrassment. It was certainly not the kind of silence Amina wore like calm. "If the person doesn't step forward," Blake added, "I will check the cameras. Not out of suspicion, out of respect. The right thing deserves to be named." The cameras told the story. Black and white clips from the library stitched together a wordless film in which a woman walked in with towels, saw, acted, pressed, breathed, counted, waited, spoke with her eyes, stayed until help came. Her name was not in the corner of the screen, but anyone who shared rooms with her knew it. That night, the house manager found Amina in the garden with her blue notebook and said with a stiffness that sounded like apology trying to dress itself as authority, "Mr. Harrington would like to see you personally." The library smelled faintly of books, lemon oil, and the kind of worry that has already passed. Blake sat in the chair he had left too suddenly the night before, a blanket across his knees again, his eyes clear. "Amina," he said, and made it a greeting instead of a question. "You were the one." "I saw you needed help," she answered. "There is no glory in naming more than that." "How did you know what to do?" She thought of the clinic's fluorescent lights and the way her mother's breath had learned the lesson of leaving. "I studied nursing," she said. 2 years. I had to stop when my mother got sick again. I took whatever work I could get to pay for what we could not afford. He let the answer sit between them without poking at it to see if it was soft. "You saved my life," he said simply. "And I don't intend to say thank you only by saying thank you." A pause that felt like a door opening. "Starting today, You will work with me directly. I want your mind where it can be seen. She did not ask if he was serious. She had learned to recognize the sound of seriousness in a room, the way you recognize the sound of rain coming before it hits the window. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. The change did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived with a new badge and a new desk in a small office near the library. It arrived with a passcode and a list of phone numbers. Her tasks came to include ordering medications, coordinating staff schedules, organizing papers, reading with care, then reading again. The work suited the part of her that had always wanted to be a clear surface others could rest a problem on. She carried a small notebook and took notes, like a court reporter, of things that might otherwise vanish. On her second day in the new role, she found the loose thread in a medical order dosage, decimal danger, and phoned the clinic to correct it. The nurse on the other end thanked her in a rush that sounded like she had just been spared the worst kind of arithmetic. Not everyone met the change with gratitude. The house bent around new lines of authority, the way an old coat resists a new owner's shoulders. Some nodded stiffly. Some examined the carpet when she entered. Rick found himself reassigned to weekend shifts at the event barn, where the air smelled of hay and regret instead of perfume and relief. Tyler's swagger softened into the courtesy of asking whether she needed space on the stairs before racing up them. Marcy stuck to her scripts of whisper and shrug, then avoided the break room altogether when Amina was there, as if the presence of someone she had belittled turned coffee bitter. Belle did not adjust. "Dad, she's not trained for this," she said in a voice that tried to be reasonable and failed because it brought only feeling to the conversation. "She's a housekeeper. Gratitude is one thing. Restructuring the house around her is another." "This is not about gratitude," Blake replied without looking up. "This is about qualifications that matter. Integrity, clarity, accuracy. The ability to act in the decisive second." In the weeks after, storms rolled through and left the air rinsed. Amina came to understand the rhythm of the estate from a new vantage point. She saw where waste was baked into a plan and revised it. She caught a leak in a charity ledger and followed it back to an accounting error that had been hiding on purpose. She learned the alarm codes and the way Chef Denise softened in the presence of anyone who cleaned as carefully as she cooked. One afternoon, the gardener's boy, 9 years old and solemn, pressed his palms to the skin of his mother's back and said it felt too hot. Amina touched the woman's forehead and watched the pulse flutter hard at the base of her throat. "You're going to sit," she instructed. "You're going to drink this slowly. Joe, bring me the orange juice from the fridge." The woman's eyes cleared. Later, the gardener found Amina by the roses and said, "You saved my Maria's sugar from falling into the floor." He said it with his hat in his hands. Amina shook her head. "I listened to what her son knew, and then to what her body was telling us," she answered. Both were telling the truth. That small rescue traveled the staff quietly, kindness interrupting the flow of older stories. People still whispered, but now their whispers carried more shame than surety. The quiet drew respect to itself with the same gravity that had once drawn contempt. Her office became a small harbor. She kept it simple: a plant in the window, a tray for papers in transit, a framed photo of her mother at a church picnic, laughing with her mouth open as if laughter were a kind of prayer no one could interrupt. On rainy afternoons, Amina and Blake worked between towers of file folders while thunder rolled like a conversation between old men. He began to tell the story of his own losses in pieces he could handle. "I had all the money in the world," he said once, eyes on the glass. And not 1 second more with my wife. The sentence came out with no ornament and landed in the room like truth. Amina looked up, met his gaze, and did not fill the space with comfort that would bounce and leave. Sometimes grief teaches the same lesson every day, she said, and we have to learn it again every day. He began to trust her advice in small things, and after the small things proved themselves, in larger ones. When a vendor tried to bill twice for the same installation, she wrote a letter whose politeness pinched the excess out of the invoice. When the foundation's scholarship committee fell in love with a candidate's pedigree and ignored the application's math, she sat at the table, read the details out loud, and waited. The room shifted. Numbers rebalanced. Merit, not gloss, rose. With trust came attention that others noticed. Belle's noticing turned into attention so taut it hummed. In a meeting about the foundation's autumn gala, Belle pushed for a photo-op partnership with a luxury brand whose charitable giving was a glossy fraction of their profits. Visibility matters, she argued, tapping her pen on the folder as if the rhythm could enforce agreement. Amina, invited to the meeting because Blake wanted one person at the table who counted something besides faces, said, "Visibility isn't virtue. We could fund the free clinic's mobile unit for a year with what that partnership would cost us to host. That would make us visible to people who have never had a reason to know our name except to tell it to a pharmacist who refuses credit." "Your job is logistics," Belle fired back, "not philosophy." "My job is to speak honestly and present the math," Amina replied, voice steady. "The rest is your father's decision." It was. He chose the mobile clinic. "We can buy luxury any time," he said, finally meeting his daughter's eyes. "We cannot buy back the days someone loses waiting for a doctor to come to them." Belle left the room without slamming the door, because slamming doors did not happen in houses like this, but the air after she was gone smelled faintly of heat. Amina returned to her office and picked up the blue notebook. She wrote 2 words, "Stay steady." Then she made the calls to the clinic, to the van outfitter, to the donors whose hearts would rather beat for a thing they could touch than for a logo they could admire. Weeks slipped into a quarter year. Autumn came to the live oaks and drew gold along the edges of their leaves. The mobile clinic rolled out to church parking lots and school fields, and mothers stood under its awning while a nurse checked blood pressure and a doctor checked a child's throat. Amina went once to see it, standing off to the side with her hands in her jacket pockets like any volunteer, watching an older man fold his hat in his hands while the nurse explained his numbers. When the van doors closed at dusk, she stood and looked at the sky as if something written there were finally legible. The recognition event was Blake's idea. "Not a gala," he said, "a gathering. We'll invite the people who think power is a room you enter by invitation and show them that power is a life you enter by service." He smiled then, small and real. "We won't say it like that. We'll simply do it." Amina planned the event with her usual efficiency. She chose the grand parlor instead of the ballroom because the parlor could hold more truth. She asked Chef Denise to create a menu that tasted like home instead of a menu that performed. She placed chairs close enough that applause would feel like warmth instead of a performance. She did not write a speech for herself because she did not intend to speak. The evening arrived as twilight lowered its shoulder into the horizon. Guests moved through the house as if its doors had always been open to them. The parlor filled. Donors in suits the color of certainty, local officials with practiced smiles, a pastor or two, the clinic doctor in a tie that did not know how to sit. Blake stood with a microphone and no stage. He let the room hush itself and then said the sentence that would send a tremor through everything that had been built on pretense. "A few months ago, I almost died," he began. "You do not know that because the people in my house know the difference between telling a story and selling one. I am here because a woman whose name most of you would not have known saw me, acted, and stayed until life returned. I want you to know her." He turned and lifted an open hand toward the side of the room, where Amina stood near the plant she had chosen for that corner 2 weeks earlier. The applause that rose was thin at first, polite in the way safe applause always is. As she walked forward, it thickened. Not because she smiled, she did not, but because the room recognized something it had forgotten. That a person who stands without calling attention to herself can call attention to what matters. She took the microphone and let silence stand with her for a breath before she spoke. "I didn't act that night to be remembered," she said. "I acted because I knew what to do, and because doing the next right thing is not a job title. It's a choice." She looked at faces, some open, some guarded, some tilted with the curiosity of people who want to admire a thing without being changed by it. "There are people in this house, in every house, who are invisible until they are heroic. Perhaps we can start seeing them before that." It was not a long speech. It was the kind that ends at the right time without needing the clock. The room answered with the kind of applause that gets out of its own way. Later, after the guests drifted home on their cushions of praise, after the staff had stacked chairs and carried trays and shouted quietly across rooms, Amina walked back through the garden. The roses had folded into themselves for the night. She sat on the step and took out the blue notebook. "You are seen," she wrote, then stopped. She crossed it out and tried again. "You are seen by who needs to see. Keep working." She did. In the months that followed, she kept a line open between Blake's health and the world's needs. She made appointments, she canceled the wrong ones. She sent flowers not because money can buy flowers, but because grief sometimes needs something living to sit beside it. She did not move into rooms that were not hers, but rooms moved to make space for her. Chef Denise began saving an extra plate for her and labeling it with a neat post-it note that simply read, A. Tyler started holding the door and stopped calling it chivalry. Marcy learned the art of apology by practicing it and by having it received without ceremony. As for Belle, time did not erase her. People like her are not erased by time. They are sanded by it if they let themselves be, and sometimes they do, if someone around them teaches by example. The mobile clinic returned each month with fresh stories. Belle rode along one afternoon, sitting in a folding chair, while a woman explained how the van turned fear into relief and relief into laughter. When the day ended, Belle climbed into her car and sat with her hands on the wheel for 10 full minutes. She did not say she was sorry the next day. She simply brought Amina a file to review and added please to her sentence, and though the word almost broke in her mouth on the way out, it arrived whole. There were other small heroics. One evening, thunder again speaking its long language, the power flickered and the backup generator stalled. In the dip between light and light, the alarms thought for a moment that the house was in trouble. Doors that should not lock did. The house manager panicked in a polite whisper. Amina took the maintenance map, found the reset panel, and pressed the red button while Blake waited on the stair landing and watched the house return to itself. "You remind me of who I used to be," he said into the returning hum. She glanced at him. "Maybe that part never left," she offered. "Maybe it just got quiet." He nodded, and the moment folded into the day like a note slipped into a pocket. When the year turned, the roses woke early. Amina stood in the garden on a damp morning and thought of her mother, of the scholarship that would have been enough if the bills had not multiplied, of the way grace sometimes arrives as a job that is not the one you thought you wanted, but is the one that leads you to the person you promised yourself you would be. She turned a page in the blue notebook and began a list headed "What Matters." It included the mobile clinic, Chef Denise's sick aunt who needed rides, the gardener's son whose curiosity about engines could be fed with an apprenticeship at the estate's workshop, Blake's cardiac rehab schedule, and an extra chair in the break room that did not dip to one side when you sat on it. There was no fairy tale marriage at the end of her story, no sudden title change that remade her into something other than what she already was. There was respect and work and a widening circle of people who understood that dignity does not arrive with wealth. It arrives when you recognize it in yourself and then choose it for others. Amina's quiet remained, but people learned to hear it. It said, "I see you." It said, "I will not break." It said, "We can do this better." If you stood at the garden wall late one evening and looked in, you might see her walking toward the house under the live oak's lacework of leaves, a small notebook in her hand, and a job to finish before sleep. You might think you understand the scale of her life by the size of her steps. You would be wrong. Some lives are wide in ways no photograph can hold. Some names are known only where it matters. Some victories do not post themselves. They simply continue. And if you asked Blake Harrington, he would tell you that the question he is proudest to have asked in his entire life was made of 4 quiet words spoken in a library the day after he nearly died. "Amina, tell me everything." He will tell you that listening did not cost him a thing he could not afford, and that it bought him back more than money ever had: trust, time, and a house where people learned that the best kind of power is the power to see one another clearly. Life does not always give us the chance to be heroes in rooms full of witnesses. More often, it gives us a room where no one is looking and a decision to make anyway. Amina made hers and kept making it in the small ways that bind a place together, in honest numbers, in steady hands, in a voice that did not rise to be heard and was heard anyway. Her story is not flashy. It will not be written on the side of a van. It will not be announced by a trumpet from a balcony. It will be remembered in a kitchen where the cook learned to say thank you and mean it. In a clinic where a child opened her mouth and laughed at the coldness of a tongue depressor because the nurse had made a game of it. In an office where a photo of a laughing woman watched over a desk where things were set right. If this story reached you, if somewhere in these paragraphs you found a reminder that quiet strength is still strength, that service is still the fastest way to change a room, that the people we overlook often carry the skills that save us, take a moment now to look around your own life for the invisible people who hold it together. Offer your thanks while their hands are still busy. And if you felt something good here, we'd love to hear from you. Share your reflections in a comment. Tell us about the unsung helpers in your world, and subscribe to join us for more everyday miracles. Your voice helps these stories travel to the hearts that need them most.